Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
People of Reddit, what's the creepiest encounter you've had with a complete stranger that still gives you chills?
I was in a grocery store doing my weekly shop, and was approached by a man who said I was pretty and asked for my number. No intros, no asking me how I'm doing, just getting straight to it. I politely declined and said I wasn't interested. He became persistent, so I ended up telling him to just give me his number so I could end the interaction. After he gives me his number, I go back to shopping without incident, or so I think. It turns out that this man was keeping an eye on me from the dairy section as I was walking up and down the aisles. As I'm getting ready to head to checkout, he decides to approach me again. This time, he's super agitated and raises his voice while asking why I won't just give him my number. I decide to be direct, and tell him that I said I wasn't interested, and I will not be giving my number to a stranger. He really had an issue with it, became irate, and had to be removed from the store. I was walked to my car, and he ended up following me out of the parking lot. I was on my street when I noticed I was being followed, drove past my house, and started driving towards the police station in my city. He followed me until he realized I was turning into that driveway, and then sped off. Luckily, I haven't seen him since.
I am a petite woman, and I was walking my dog before a hike in the early AM in the city. I crossed paths with a man going the opposite direction and make eye contact and give a polite smile. The man abruptly turns around and starts walking behind me. I turn, he turns. The next block, I turn, he turns. The third turn, when he followed me, I start to jog a little and look back, and he has started to jog. I take out my cell phone and wake up my husband and yelling into my phone say, "Hey, I am almost home. Can you meet me outside the house?" I stayed on the phone with him repeating the same request. He was confused but complied, and when I made the last turn onto my block, the man turned the opposite way. I was shaking and immediately broke down crying when I got to my husband waiting for me outside. I always wonder what this man's motives were or what would have happened if I hadn't taken out my phone and called my husband.
I was walking home from work around 11 p.m. from Wrigley Field in Chicago. I walked home every night for years through these parts and never had any issue. I had my music in but never listened loud just in case. For about a mile I could hear someone yelling behind me, but they weren't close and I couldn't make out anything they were saying. I started to get a really bad vibe and decided to mute my music for a bit. I started to hear the voice getting closer but still couldn't make anything out until I heard a distinct, "I just really don't like gay people." I turned around and saw an old junkie dude just sprinting at me full force from behind. I remember his arms were flailing in the air uncontrollably. I decided quickly to just cross the street and see if he would follow me. I turned to stare at him as he slowed to a walk and stayed on his side of the street. Once he was parallel to me, without even glancing over, he calmly said, "That's exactly what I would have done." And continued on, turning left into the train station about a block ahead. Gave me the creepiest feeling. I definitely was ready to fight if I needed, but dude had the most whacked out posture and vibe I'd ever seen.
Had a random car follow us for several miles, flashing its lights, turn signals, and hazard lights trying to get us to pull over in the middle of nowhere at around 1 a.m. Oddly, he didn't honk, just got right on our bumper and flashed all his lights. Luckily my BF was with me, or I would have been terrified. We just kept driving. It was a totally dark country road, and I had a gun in my lap because we were sure we were about to be run off the road and robbed. The moment we got to a well-lit intersection, the car did a quick U-turn and went speeding back the way it came. It weirded me out so much that we reported it to the sheriff's department, but they hadn't received any other calls about it.
I was playing at the end of the trailer park and a guy pulled up in a convertible. He said he knew my mom and held up a Polaroid across the front seat. I saw the lady didn't have the right hair color and said so. He got frustrated and insisted I should come closer to be sure. I said, "No, I'm actually going to get lunch now, sorry." He gave me a fake smile and left, so I turned around. My neighbor, who later again saved my life quite literally, was walking up with an odd expression and her purse. Found out a few years later that she had a .357 in there, and there was a serial killer killing young boys in the city for about 3 years around then. When my son was a toddler, I made a late-night run to a 24-hour Walgreens to pick up a prescription for him. We lived in an urban area where that Walgreens was actually busy at that time of night. It was also right next to a metro stop and was not a place where most people drove, so parking was super limited. I ended up parking at a curb a bit away from the store. When I got back to my car, a youngish, very normal, by my estimation, guy came up to my window. I rolled it down a bit and he said, "I think I know you from XYZ place." I had actually been to XYZ place before. XYZ place was also a very popular place, so I tried to remember him. In that spilt second that I hesitated trying to remember him, his eyes went completely black, his whole face changed, and he grabbed the door handle of my car and tried to open it. I put the car in drive and peeled out of there looking straight ahead. Only when I got to a red light a few streets away did I realize that the overhead light was on. He had actually opened my door a bit and I hadn't realized. I never forgot his face. How it changed. I remember one of Ted Bundy's victims, survivor obviously, described how his face went from normal, attractive, friendly to black-eyed, unrecognizable, and frenzied. That's how this man transformed. There were some missing women in our city and I always wondered if this guy did it. I was driving on a back road at night heading to my parents' house when a Cadillac started following me. It was a one-lane road at night, dazzling on and off, and this guy I notice has been following me for a little over 2 miles. At first I thought it was paranoia, so I used my blinker and they copied me. Every time I did it. A soul blue light then went off on their hood behind me, I guess trying to get me to pull over. I called 911 and stayed on the line until the police intercepted me. Last, the guy ended up being wanted on warrants for skipping bail on an SA charge. Definitely came way too close that night. Driving across the country with my wife and dog, we stopped at a gas station around midnight. I was coming out of the bathroom, and I saw the guy mopping the floor had stopped, and was just staring out the window at my wife, who had finished letting the dog pee and was slowly walking back to the car. There was a super creepy guy slowly sneaking up behind her. He was like 20 feet back, but quietly getting closer, and my wife had no idea. So I got out of the gas station real quick, and loudly went over to them, hugged the dog, said let's get going, etc. The second I walked over to them, the guy turned around and ran away. My wife never knew there was a guy sneaking up behind her until I told her once we got back in the road. I think I accidentally did one of these to a stranger before. I was working at a mall in a state where marijuana was illegal. I was buying from one of my employees, and we would regularly meet in a secluded corner of the parking lot to exchange. One night after closing, I'm driving around to the spot like I had done 100 times previously and see her car. Spontaneously, I decided to be a goofy goober. I pull in the spot on the right. My arms locked at 10 and 2 o'clock, my gaze forward, I sit motionless for a good 10 to 15 seconds before doing a super exaggerated head turn / neck whip to the left and channeling my best Jack Nicholson Joker grin. I had the wrong car. I'm a middle-aged, bald, white dude driving a Honda Civic, and the young black lady I did this to looked so terrified. I think she was having a heated phone conversation, but her survival instincts kicked in real fast and she zoomed out of there. I learned my lesson, though. I'm too old to be buying drugs at night anymore. I was in Vienna during Christmas break. There is a large open-air market in the middle of the city and thousands of people were milling about, eating, drinking, and shopping in the evening. A very attractive blonde woman with light blue eyes bumps into me, and in accented English apologizes. I said, "No worries," and we started chatting. She says she's from Poland and she's here for New Year's visiting a friend. I mentioned I'm American but Polish in heritage and we continue to talk for several minutes. She says that she's hungry and wants to get food. I offered to buy her a slice of pizza at a booth. I get one for both of us and she takes a bite and says she doesn't like it and wants to go to a place away from the town center. Something about how quickly she rejected the pizza, which was quite good, set off alarms and I wished her a pleasant evening and walked away. I looped around the town center and coincidentally saw her walking down an alley with two large men, one on each side of her. Very quickly I realized that she was bait to draw me into an alley so they could mug me. I definitely dodged a bullet that day. I used to work at a liquor store and while I was on a smoke break a guy came up started small talking to me in bad English. He was 40-something Latino guy and he just had this look like he was not right in the head. He said he wanted to buy something so I went in and he got nude magazines and cleaning products. I didn't say a word but he looked at me and raised his eyebrows and said, "My house is going to be fun tonight, you should come by." I said no and gave him a really disgusted look. He leaves and I shake it off. A few minutes later a teenager on a skateboard comes in and gets a Coke. He leaves and I hear talking outside but I had customers so I couldn't see what was going on. After a little bit the older guy comes back in and buys beer and duct tape. This time he's looking away from and not talking. I ring him up and demand a black bag. I bag his stuff and he leaves, then the talking ensues. I poke my head outside. He was talking to the teenager. He goes over and quickly puts the bag in the truck but pulls out the beer. Heads over to the passenger side opening it and putting the beer in it, then waves over the teenager. I ran up and asked the kid what he's doing. He tries saying, "None of your business, man," and I very clearly explain, "I don't care about the beer if he bought it for you. This dude bought duct tape, cleaning products, and nude magazines. The beer is the least of my concerns. I'm about to call the cops on this guy, don't go with him." He gives me a shocked look and says, "What? He just offered me a ride, I'm not into that shit." As he's getting on his skateboard the man gets really upset with me and pulls out a knife saying something in Spanish. So I pull out my phone and pretend I'm recording him because my POS phone had super cracked screen and only used it for receiving calls. But I memorize his license plate as he starts getting in his truck. He leaves and I call the cops immediately. Lucky he paid for the cleaning products and magazines with a credit card but paid cash for the duct tape and beer. The cops tell me that truck and license plate has a warrant for arrest, wouldn't tell me what for but said they would find him and thoroughly thanked me for warning the teenager though. I wonder what he's done. When I was 9, I was in Kmart with my uncle in the television section. Remember when Kmart had those separate rooms for the TVs and big electronics? It was Saturday morning and he sat me and my little sister down and told us to watch the cartoons on the TVs while he hunted down a salesperson. Not 2 minutes after he was gone, we approached my two men and they tried everything to lure us out. We were petrified and didn't say a word. They finally lifted my sister to carry her out and were reaching for me when my sister peed on the one guy. He dropped her and she started crying. My uncle heard her and came running. The guys bolted. I still think about that all the time. We were so lucky that day. My wife and I stopped at a park with our then 7-year-old daughter. My wife went off on her own for a few to look at some trees while I took my daughter over to the bank of the lake. Seemingly of nowhere this really creepy guy walked up and started addressing my daughter while ignoring me. He was going on about how to attract the ducks and was positioning himself in a way to get in between us. I did a quick calculation where I had a base set up to kick his ass into the ropes along the edge of the lake, which would trip him at his knees and send him into the water. I had my daughter by the hand and just interrupted the guy and pulled her away. The guy turned around and went right to his car and left immediately. My instincts were strongly indicating that this man was intending to abduct my daughter, and the chills from that experience still haunt me many years later. One time I was walking home with my daughter, about 7 years at the time. We were walking down a short street leading off of a main road. As we were about to turn off into a different street, I noticed a man running across the main road against the lights. For whatever reason he put me on edge, but he was a fair distance away from us, so I thought I was probably just being paranoid and decided to be extra vigilant. He was probably about 5 to 10 minutes walk behind us at that stage. I didn't say anything to my daughter as I didn't want to scare her. So she's straggling along, staring at the ground, and keeps falling a step or two behind me. I turn around to grab her hand to hurry her along, and this guy is standing right behind me. So close that he was walking right next to my daughter, and so silently that neither of us noticed. He almost bumped into me when I stopped walking. That's how close he was to us. I let out an almost involuntary, "Oh shit," right in his face. He says, "Hi," and immediately takes off running down a side street. I don't know what his plan was, but it couldn't have been anything innocent. I'm pretty sure that we were just about to be assaulted, but that my lucky split-second reaction scared him off just before he could act. When I was about 6 years old, this would have been around 1990, I was riding my big wheel bike down my block in a DC suburb. The way our street was situated, at the end of the block was the entrance to an alleyway that took you behind all the houses. I would frequently turn down the alley and go behind our house and enter through our back gate. As I got towards the end of the block, a car was coming and I stopped and waved my hand indicating that they could go ahead and I would wait for them to pass. The driver in the car refused to go and motioned for me to turn instead. So I went ahead and entered the alley. I got about halfway up the alley, not quite to my house, when someone grabbed me from behind. It was the driver, and she was pissed. She had turned into the alley after me, drove down, parked her car in the middle of the alley and gotten out. She yanked me up by the arm, and screamed in my face, "Don't you ever use police signals with me." I immediately began sobbing, ran to my house and told my parents. By the time they ran out the back door, the driver was gone. I'm 38 now and still think about it. It doesn't give me chills, but I do reflect and wonder what would have happened. We had just moved from Illinois to Florida. I had just turned 12, so this was '86. It was a weekend, I don't remember the specific day. I got up early and went to the basketball court in the apartment complex I lived in. Started playing and this hatchback pull up. Guy gets out of the car and asks if he can shoot around with me. He's talking to me, don't remember the actual conversation. I do remember him telling me that he had a job interview and needed to borrow a comb. He asked me if I had one and I told him yeah. He asked to borrow it and I said sure, I just need to go grab it real quick. He said that he would drive me and I told him, no, that's okay. I live right over there and I could walk. He was pretty insistent on giving me a ride. Finally I just told him that I'd be right back. Went towards my house through the courtyard, but never went there. Waited around the corner to see what he was doing. One of the older girls that I played ball with showed up. He left a couple minutes later. Coming from small town Illinois, I was pretty naive. But that whole thing felt off. The dude didn't bother me, just the insistence on him giving me a ride. A little less than a decade ago, 2 of my buddies and I descended from the mountains during the night because of a massive storm that flooded our camp spot. We arrived into the small town at the base around 2 a.m. and checked the established campsites, but they were also all muddy and flooded. We noticed a tent set up in there though, and as we walked away we all realized at the same time that a man with a large white beard and wearing all black was walking at the same pace as us out of the campground area. As we walked closer towards the main road we eventually lost sight of him. Since we had parked my friend's car in the next town and had taken a bus back several towns to start our hike, we had never planned to come to this town and therefore had no means of transportation out of there. We decided to get some rooms for the night and head back on our hike once the storm passed the next day. So we walked to every hotel in this town, but they had no rooms available anywhere. After about an hour of walking in the rain, we stood under an awning at the gas station and the worker came out to tell us that the post office building was open all night and sometimes stranded hikers spent the night in there and it was fine. So we went there. We threw our sleeping pads on the floor and tried to get a few hours of sleep now that we were sheltered. At some point I hear my friend say, "Someone is watching us outside." We all get up and look and it's the white-beard ninja creep-looking guy. He is just standing there with his nose on the window staring at us. Then he slowly walks away after a few minutes while looking back at us a few times before vanishing. We all agreed to leave this building before getting murdered in it or that maybe that man's campsite was flooded and he might have been trying to sleep there as well. Either way we decided to sit in a covered bus stop bench and drink the last of the warm beers in our backpacks while watching an incredible lightning show. Not too long after though, we saw a white-beard ninja guy sit at a bench across the street from us outside of a restaurant. We just sat there doing our thing while he distantly looked at us and sometimes laid his head down on the table. This went on until about 6 a.m., when the rain stopped. He just walked away and we left shortly after. We later found out that he is in fact a homeless person who lives there. He probably just wanted a place to sleep. I have seen him several times over the years as he is always hanging out outside that same restaurant. I bought him food and offered him beer but he declined the beer. I asked him about his life but he speaks so low and mumbled that I cannot understand anything he says. He seems really sweet in a way but obviously mentally ill also. The locals say he is harmless and just a bit lost. Anyway, I'm not sure what to think of him but when I saw him standing in the rain, staring at me as I woke up, it freaked me. I was desperately hunting for an apartment in Berlin 7 to 9 years back and decided to try Craigslist to see if I can find any. There was one woman looking for a roommate and after sending her a quick email she promptly answered, quite fast actually. We agreed that she can show her apartment the next evening and I found myself there the next day with terrible weather. The apartment was at the top floor with no elevator. When she opened the door for me I realized this might be a weird one. She seemed quite groggy, spoke well but weirdly and gave an off vibe a little bit. The kitchen and the room she was renting were nice and clean, but I got a glimpse of her room which was incredibly messy and just reeked. The bathroom had a big tub that was filled to the brim with water. I asked if she was going to take a bath jokingly and she just shrugged and said it didn't work, which itself didn't make sense. We went to the kitchen to chat more and she seated me with my back to the entryway, so I didn't see anything behind me or in the rooms. Almost instantly I hear something moving in one of the rooms and I asked if she had a friend in the apartment. She didn't even answer this but started to babble about something else. My spider senses went haywire and something in my head just said leave now, so I just stood up and quickly grabbed my shoes and got myself out of the apartment while shouting, thanks, in the stairway. In the evening she sent me an email that totaled like 5 pages about God and some absolutely nutty stuff. Needless to say I blocked her and hopefully never run into her again. I was really into hitchhiking in California years ago. 99% of the drivers were super cool and I made great memories, and then about 1 in 100 drivers were creepy AF or just really weird. So many crazy stories. The craziest and creepiest was on a month-long hitchhiking trip up and down the 101 in the middle of the night I got picked up by a van. Almost immediately when I entered the car I got some yellow flags, trash everywhere, a rancid stank, and the dude was morbidly and visually unclean. I tried to make a little small talk and introduced myself as usual, but he didn't respond, just kept driving. Red flag number 1 was the first thing this dude said to me in a serious tone was, "Haven't been a lot of murders this year, have there?" I nervously laughed and started thinking about an exit plan. Red flag number 2 was I realized the van locks had been cut off. They were the pop-up and down door locks and they were just chopped down, so I couldn't unlock the door. I started freaking out a little bit and he was also driving really fast. I ended up faking like I was sick and about to throw up. I got him to pull over but he didn't turn off the car or unlock the doors. I frantically climbed back into the back of the van, and Jimmy D the trunk open. I then sprinted into the forest. Still gives me chills to think about that encounter to this day. I was 12 years old and staying with my parents at a hotel in Dallas. I was in the adjoining room. At some point in the evening I got a call on my hotel phone and answered it. A man claiming to be hotel security told me to unlock my door so they could do security checks when they do their rounds. I told him okay and hung up. I then went to my folks' room and told them to unlock their door so security could check on them. Clearly my folks were upset and explained that the door locks were there to protect me. Later that night I awoke to pulling on my door. It was creepy. I was over a friend of a friend's house a couple years ago. I can't remember if it was basketball, soccer or boxing, but my friend had been invited to this guy's house to watch an event, and since we were already together he invited me too. All day this guy talked about his dogs, 3 pit bulls, and how much he loved them. He talked about their look and their size and their bloodline and what they knew how to do, on and on about his dogs. Later in the evening, around 7 p.m., we're having a couple beers hanging in the living room and there's a ruckus from the kitchen. One of the dogs had bit his daughter. He grabs the dog by the collar, takes it outside. A couple minutes later I hear the loud snap of a gunshot. He comes back in, sits down like nothing happened. Joking, talking about the game. I must have been staring at him, because after a while he focuses on me, laughs obnoxiously, and goes, "Yeah, yep. And I don't even like you."
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.